everybody, this is Bunny, and today we are going to talk about priming your miniatures. You can see here that I have a selection of miniatures ready to be primed. I've got everything from bigger minis, this is a giant, to the miniature we assembled in the last video, to some pieces of scenery like sleeping bags and some trunks, some trees over here. I've got a little of everything. So when you're painting miniatures of any type, whether it's terrain or whether it's actual miniatures, so you've got pieces of terrain back here. When you're priming them, the first thing you need to do is notice what they're made of. Now, all of the miniatures on my table here right now are plastic, okay? I don't have any metal miniatures that need priming right now, though I do indeed have metal miniatures that I have already primed and painted. But none of this selection here is metal. They're all plastic. So if you do have metal or you do have plastic, you're going to have one of the two. You'll either have the pewter miniatures or the plastic. Maybe you'll have resin if you printed them yourself. Whatever you have, you want to make sure you use a primer that is compatible with that material. Okay, that is the most important thing. So there are two types of primers that we're going to talk about. We are going to talk about a liquid primer that you paint onto your miniatures, and we're going to talk about rattle can primers or spray primers. The third type of primer is basically airbrushing your primer on, but the point of these videos is to give you easy, quick ways to paint miniatures on your own that are satisfactory and you will enjoy playing with, so you don't have to play with just gray minis and you don't have to pay somebody a lot of money to get them for you. Okay? So we're not going to talk about airbrush because it is actually really difficult. Airbrushing is a technique that requires a lot of practice, and frankly, it kind of sucks. I airbrush, I do. I hate it. Okay? Airbrushing, I only do it for clients who are paying me quite a lot of money to do a really top-notch job. Otherwise, I don't airbrush, because airbrushing is annoying and it's difficult and it takes a long time to master that particular skill. So because of that, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to talk about airbrushing your primer onto your pieces. Instead, we're going to talk about either painting a primer on or spraying it on with a rattle can. So, I do not actually like painting primers on with a paintbrush. Okay, I don't even have a liquid primer prepped because I'm actually going to spray them all. But I do recommend you paint primers on things that are really tiny. So you see these teeny weeny little chunks? They're smaller than my fingertip. These are actually not easy to prime with a rattle can because you actually have to tape them down. So you have to put a piece of tape and then stick him face down, paint him. Then you got to turn him over, put him on a fresh piece of tape so you can spray paint that top so he doesn't roll all around. Because the force of a rattle can is going to send him poof off in the middle of nowhere. So I actually do recommend a paint-on primer for these kind of guys. They're so small. So these guys are pretty light and they'll roll around. Something like this is not going to stay put very well. This little mask is going to fly all over the place. So yeah, definitely for those kind of things, you can and probably should use a liquid primer. The things with liquid primers is you have to get full coverage, and that can be tricky. I mean, look at all the grooves in something like this tree. All of those little grooves all need to have primer without filling up the grooves because you still want the texture in the finished model. So it's really difficult sometimes to get that full coverage. But for smaller pieces, I absolutely recommend it. Things like this, grab them with tweezers, paint half, let it dry, turn over, grab it with tweezers again, paint the other half. So follow the manufacturer's directions on the type of primer you're using. Okay, I can't tell you because I don't know what kind of primer you have, but a lot of companies make pretty good primer for minis. I'm actually, for liquid primer, I am actually kind of drawn, I like the Reaper miniature primer. It works really well. Let's talk about primer color for a minute. You might have noticed when I showed you this rattle can, it's black. I am often asked why I prime everything black. Because if we pan up here on my shelf, you'll notice already primed figures are black. Okay, they're sitting here ready to be primed. And you probably noticed that in one of my other videos. You probably noticed that they were all primed black. Nothing is primed white or even gray. So primer color is a matter of preference. I use black because, one, your miniatures tend to not start out black, right? They tend to start out like your grays or your yellows or your greens, or they tend not to use a black plastic to make your miniatures. That's not very common. You do some, yeah, but most of them are actually like this. They are gray is the standard. So because of that, a gray primer wouldn't show up. Okay, so I wouldn't be able to tell easily and quickly if she was entirely covered in primer if I used gray. All right, and just to kind of show you the difference, wonder if I have anything. This tree probably has a good bottom. Okay, so this was a brown plastic. These trees started out brown because it was nice of the company to start them out brown, even though we all paint them anyway, so it didn't really matter. But it's still nice of the company to do it. So you can see that's the original color, and then I primed it black. So that is easy to see if you'd missed, right? So you can tell, ooh, didn't get those leaves. So you'd be able to see it really, really easily. So it shows up first of all, okay? And here someone's going to say, well, white shows up. Yeah, white does show up. White's also a pain to cover, okay? Now, some people love priming white. However, it's a pain in the butt to cover because for the most part, we are not painting most of our miniatures bright white, right? We are not. So are there some exceptions? Sure. There are a few exceptions to that rule, and that's fine. So, for example, I have a Princess Leia miniature that I'm working on, and Princess Leia is white. So because she's white, right? She's white. So priming her white would make sense. I still am not going to prime her white because it doesn't make any sense to prime her white because I don't use white primer. I just use black primer. So I'm still priming her black. But in her case, it might make sense to prime her white. However, black covers your miniatures better and it is easier to cover. I know that sounds counterintuitive. Isn't a lighter color easier to cover? No. Because if a little bit of black shows through on a miniature, it's not the end of the world. So if we grab this guy who is painted but not sealed, okay, this guy has been painted but he's not sealed. So he's all dirtied up, so he looks like he crawled out of a cave. But if we look, for example, at him, look at his coloring. If we were to try to cover white, it would constantly show through. Now, it would take a lot of layers to cover up white primer with this brown color of his skin. Okay, it would actually take a lot of layers. And you can see I painted the ropes a pale bone color, and they are fine. They covered that black easily, but white is so much harder to cover. So I recommend going black at first. If you want to experiment with a white or a gray primer, feel free to do that. I'm just telling you now, black is easier to cover, it's easier to find, and frankly, it's just easier to apply. All right? And remember when you're priming, full coverage. So let's move on to how to prime. I'm only going to show you how to prime with the rattle can, because the rattle can is the fastest, easiest way to prime your minis. I absolutely recommend priming with a rattle can. So the first thing you want to do, get yourself a black matte primer. Okay, so a flat black. You don't want a shiny primer because shiny primers, I don't even know why they make them. Paint doesn't stick to them very well. And the whole point of a primer is to prepare your model to accept paint. Okay, someone here is going to ask me, well, what if I buy miniatures that say they don't need primer? They're plastic miniatures. They don't need primer. They lie. Okay? They lie. Prime it anyway. You will thank yourself later. So, miniatures, you need to prime them. Just prime them. Don't worry about it. Prime them anyway. So, rattle can. Get yourself a rattle can. So, selecting a rattle can. I use a variety of brands. Right now I've got the Rust-Oleum because it was on sale. But any indoor-outdoor primer will work well. Make sure it's rated for the material you're using. So this one is rated for wood, metal, plastic, etc., etc. This one covers pretty much everything, unless it is a material that is going to be heated really, really hot. Then they don't want you to use this primer. They want you to use an enamel primer. Miniatures tend to not be heated because they'll melt. So it doesn't matter. So get a good primer, good quality primer that matches the material you're using. Generally, something like this, if it's an indoor-outdoor primer, that's what this is, indoors and outdoors, will work just fine. You want to check the conditions on the can. So in this case, they don't want me to use it if it's below 10 degrees Celsius. So I won't, which is about 50 degrees Fahrenheit. They don't want me to use it if it's above 32, which it's not, 32 degrees Celsius. And that is about 90 Fahrenheit. So I want to be in that zone for temperature. And it doesn't really want the humidity to be crazy, right? Ideally, you're at about a 50% humidity when you spray this. You definitely need the humidity below about 85, because the more humid your environment is, the longer it will take your primer to dry and then cure. So I try to make sure my conditions are pretty much in that zone before I prime. And that will apply to any primer. It's not just a spray can, but check your spray can because it'll tell you. The next thing you're going to do is make sure your models are clean. Models need to be clean, free of dust, free of glue. So if you have any areas that you were filling gaps and stuff, make sure you've removed any excess material. Make sure you've sanded off and then dusted each model, because if your models have a bunch of dust all over them, they're not going to take primer. So make sure they are clean, make sure they are dry. And yes, typically that means you have to let them air dry. You can't dry miniatures with cloth. There's too many grooves and recesses for moisture to collect. So make sure your miniatures are clean and dry before you start the priming process. Once they are primed, get your primer and go outside. These primers tend to need a well-ventilated area, so you can do it in a garage or a sunroom or outdoors. It doesn't matter. You probably shouldn't do this in your living room. One, there's spray cans. They are spray cans. So you'll do a lot of overspray and you might spray your couch by accident, no matter how hard you try. So don't do it in your living room. A garage or a shed works perfectly fine as long as you're within those temperature and humidity ranges. I like doing it outside if I can. For us right now, it is not super warm, but it's not so cold that I can't prime if I wait till the afternoon, which is what I'm going to do. So the other thing you want to check your dry time so you know how to time your cycle. So this particular primer, what you probably should do is spray paint one side of your miniature, wait 1 hour, flip your miniature, paint the other, wait 1 hour, then put your miniatures away to cure. And in the case of this particular primer, the cure time for plastic is about a week. If you're priming metal miniatures, it's usually about 2 to 3 days. It depends on the exact primer. But I always give everything a week to cure. We'll talk about that a little bit more after we get these sprayed. For now, let's move out of doors because I'm not spraying them in here. Alright, so we are outside now because we do not want to do this indoors because I don't want to spray all over the living room. So we're outside. It's mildly windy, but not bad. Remember, if there is a wind, do not spray into the wind. It'll just spray primer back at you. So we are not going to spray into the wind. So again, we are using our Rust-Oleum Flat Black Primer. We are going to do exactly what it says on the can. That was shake it for 1 minute, which I've actually already done before starting the film. So shake it up exactly like it says on the can. Now you want to do even sprays, and you do want to be a fair distance away. So you don't want to be right up close. So you want to be however far away it says on the can. So this one, I want to be a few inches away. Okay? And what you're going to do is you're not going to sit in one spot and spray. You're going to move kind of quickly. You want full coverage. You don't want a thick coat. So we're going to start on this side. Okay, so we're going to move fairly fast. And you notice I'm kind of spraying at an angle. This is so I get up under everything. Okay? Now that's not full coverage. But now I'm going to change sides. So I'm going to spray from over here. Then we're going to move up here and spray things from the top. Again, we're moving fairly quick. You want it covered. You don't want a thick coat. Final side. And we are now going to let that dry for 1 hour. Then we're going to flip it over. A little piece of advice, have your miniatures facing best side down when you start, because then you prime the best side last, which is what you want. One note about this piece of terrain, we are not going to have to flip him, okay, because he doesn't have anything on the bottom that we have to paint. So what we're going to do is on the next pass, we're going to remove him and replace him with another piece of terrain. But right now, we are going to go away. We'll come back in 1 hour after we have all these guys flipped and are ready to prime the second side. But you do need to let the first side dry first. So I'll see you in an hour. All right, it's getting darker, but we did flip our miniatures here, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. And like I said, we replaced the other piece of terrain with a fresh piece because those pieces do not need to be flipped. There's no reason to paint the other side of them. So here we're just going to do exactly what we did again. Again, move quickly, but full coverage still needed. So nice and quick. You don't want it to build up in any specific spot. You want decent coverage, but nothing crazy. And then switch sides. Remember, you're doing all 4 sides. All 4 sides. Also remember, when you're laying out your miniatures on your cardboard or your newspaper, when you're laying out your miniatures, you want to make sure you don't put them right next to each other, mostly because you want to be able to spray your miniatures and get all the different crevices. So sometimes people ask me, why do you have to do it from different angles? And the answer is all those little tiny crevices. So if you don't spray from all 4 sides, you're going to have spots that get missed just because you have all this detail happening. And that is literally it. We will come back in another hour once they are dry to the touch, and I'll show you what I do with them next. What you do might be slightly different. So we will be right back in 1 hour. All right, so it's actually really dark out here now because it's getting late. But these are dry, but you still want to handle them gently. So what we're going to do is we're just going to put them in a box temporarily. Okay, gently, temporarily. And I'm going to take them inside and I'll show you the very last thing I do with these guys. All right? So we'll just zip inside and I'll show you. Well, here we are inside what I call my curing cabinet. It's really a closet that I've put some little shelvy things in. So what I do here is I place my primed items. Ignore this tree. It's just here because it's here. Ignore that tree. So I take my primed items, handle them gently, and I literally just place them in on their shelves or wherever they fit. It doesn't really matter. So you just take everything and you want to not touch it for however long your paint or your primer, says to not touch it. So in my case, the primer I'm using says it takes 5 to 7 days to cure on plastic, specifically on plastic. Okay, so it's going to take 5 to 7 days to cure on plastic. So that means I'm going to leave these guys alone for a week. Now, your primer might say something else for curing time. I would give it a week anyway. So I specifically always give everything a week. Okay, it doesn't matter. I always do a week no matter what. So it just allows the primer to properly adhere to the surfaces. I don't want the primer coming off. And I have a whole bunch of other stuff to paint anyway, so it doesn't really matter if I don't paint this stuff for a week. I literally have so many other things to paint. It's fine. We just let it go. So put your stuff somewhere where it won't be disturbed. It doesn't have to be its own cabinet or its own closet. But I like to use a spot where nobody else comes in and no one else comes in here. So this is what I'm going to do. This is how I've always done it. I really recommend, even if your primer says it cures on plastic in 72 hours, give it a full week. So if I put stuff in here on Sunday, I don't take it out till Sunday. I always pick the same day of the week to do my priming. And I pick the same day of the week to do my sealing. We haven't talked about sealing yet, but there's a reason that I pick the same day. So when it comes to priming, I pick the same day so I know when I come in here next Sunday, I'll just pull everything off of here and I'll know that it's all been sitting here for that full week. I don't have stuff that I might have primed on Wednesday and some I did on Friday. It's all done on Sunday. So these will sit here for a full week. That is all you have to do to prime. You spray your things, you let them sit, flip them, let them sit again so that they are fully covered. Make sure you have full coverage, and then pop them somewhere to cure. Do not ignore the curing process. You can't just decide, I don't really think it's going to take a week to cure. I think it'll only take 12 hours. That doesn't work. If you want your paints to properly adhere to the primer, and if you want that primer to properly adhere to the miniatures, you absolutely, definitely need to make sure you wait for the primer to cure. How long that takes, you'll find that on the can. Most of them will say 5 to 7 days on plastic. So that's why we're just going to put these guys in here and completely ignore them for the next week. Let's just get her out of here. There we go. So I am not going to touch them. And I have other things to prime today too. But it is very late, so they'll probably wait till next week. Because it's not really that big a deal. You don't have to watch me priming anymore. That was a lot of priming. So that's literally all there is to priming. That's it. And that is about it for today. I hope you'll be back with us next time when we start talking about some of the tools you will need in order to start actually painting your minis. Because without tools, you're not painting anything. So that's it for us for now. Bye!